I had learned that humiliation made a different kind of silence than grief did. Grief was heavy. It pressed down until a room went still from the weight of it. Humiliation was thinner, sharper. It moved fast over skin. It made people look anywhere but at you because looking too long meant admitting they were part of it. The private room at La Rocca glittered with glass and gold leaf and polished cruelty. Chandeliers hung over the white tablecloths like frozen fireworks. The men wore watches that cost more than my father's apartment, and the women carried themselves with the soft boredom of people who had never once worried about the electricity staying on. I stood beside the dessert cart in my black dress and apron, hands clasped so hard my knuckles had blanched. I had spent 10 hours making sugar cages thin enough to shatter under a spoon, orange cream folded with mascarpone, bitter chocolate discs glossed until they reflected candlelight. My job had been to wheel them in, plate them, keep my head down, and leave. That had been before Paolo Anelli drank too much and decided I would be the evening's entertainment. "She thinks she's too good to smile," he said to the room. He was the owner's son. 28, pink with wine and entitlement, with a tie loosened at the throat and a laugh that always sounded borrowed from crueler men. 2 hours earlier, in the kitchen, he had cornered me against the refrigerator and told me I owed him gratitude for giving me work after my father's debts started following my name around Palermo. When I'd slipped past him without speaking, he had smiled in a way that promised interest later. Now was later. I asked her a question. He leaned back in his chair and looked up at me. "Tell them what you said, Alina." I kept my eyes on the edge of the table. "I said no, signor." A few people smiled into their glasses. "No," he repeated, mocking the shape of my mouth. Such a simple word for a girl in such a complicated position. The room smelled like saffron, truffle oil, warm cream, and money. Beneath it all was cigar smoke from the men at the far end, and something colder drifting in each time the serving door opened. The ocean at night, maybe, or rain trapped in stone. My pulse was loud enough to make my ears ring. At the head of the table sat the only man who had not yet looked at me with appetite or amusement. Dante Salvator had arrived an hour late and somehow made everyone grateful he had come at all. When he entered, the room had altered around him. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. It had simply tightened, as if every person there had remembered their own skeleton at once. He was not the oldest man at the table, nor the loudest. He wore a black suit with no tie, his dark hair brushed back from a face too controlled to be handsome in any safe way. He had a scar disappearing into his hairline at the temple, and a silver lighter turned slowly through his fingers. Open, click, closed, open, click, closed, a small sound, precise. Dangerous because it was quiet, I was trying not to notice him when Paolo stood. "I think," Paolo said, "that our chef should apologize." Publicly, "I am the pastry chef," I said before I could stop myself. My voice sounded thin, but it held. "Not yours." A soft hiss moved around the table. Paolo's smile hardened. He caught my wrist. Not hard enough to leave new damage, hard enough to wake the old. Pain ran up my arm in a white line. My sleeve slid back. The room blurred, then sharpened around the exposed bruises striped around both wrists. Faded yellow, violet at the edges, ugly as fingerprints even though rope had made them. Paolo let go immediately, maybe because he saw them, maybe because he finally understood he had pulled a private wound into public light. I should have covered them. That was what a smarter girl would have done, what a girl trained by fear would have done. Instead, I stood there with both hands visible at my sides. I did not cry. I did not explain. I did not beg anyone in that room to pretend they hadn't seen. For the first time all night, Dante Salvator looked directly at me, not at my face first, at my wrists. The silver lighter went still in his hand. Everything in the room changed so subtly that if I had not spent my whole life surviving other people's moods, I might have missed it. A laugh died halfway into a throat. One of the waiters stopped moving. Paolo shifted his stance as if a cold draft had reached him through the floor. Dante raised his eyes. Our gaze met. I had seen powerful men before. Powerful men were usually busy proving it. They took up space with volume, with anger, with witnesses. Dante did nothing. He looked at me once, and I understood without understanding that if he chose, this entire room would move in whatever direction he pointed. "Who put their hands on her?" he asked. His voice was low. Not bored, not loud, worse than either. Paolo laughed too fast. "It's nothing, a family matter." Dante's thumb brushed the lighter again. Click. "Elena," he said, and I hated the way my name changed in his mouth. Not softer, sharper somehow, more exact. "Come here." Every instinct I had told me not to walk toward the dangerous man at the head of a table full of dangerous men. My feet moved anyway. I stopped 2 chairs away from him. Up close, he smelled like bergamot, cold air, and the ghost of smoke embedded in wool. His gaze dropped once more to my wrists. There was something in his face that I could not name. Not pity. Pity would have been easier to survive. Paolo pushed away from his chair. "Salvatore," I said. "Sit down," Dante said. Paolo sat. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Even the kitchen noise beyond the doors seemed to recede. Dante set the lighter beside his plate, silver against white linen. His fingers were long, clean, and scarred across the knuckles. When he reached for my left wrist, he moved slowly enough that I could have pulled away. I didn't. His touch was careful in a way that hurt more than roughness had. 2 fingers. The inside of my wrist, not pressing, measuring. He turned my hand just enough to see the full line of the bruise. "Who?" he asked again, but this time the question belonged only to me. The honest answer lodged behind my teeth like glass. If I said my father, I would destroy what remained of him. If I lied, I would protect a man who had tied me to a radiator 3 nights ago because I'd asked where the missing cash had gone. I stared at the lighter instead. At the thin scratch crossing its lid, at the reflection of candlelight in metal, Dante let go of my wrist. "Take your hand off the tablecloth, Paolo," he said softly. No one else had noticed Paolo had gripped the linen so hard his knuckles were white. He released it at once. Dante stood. It was like a blade being drawn from velvet. He was tall enough that Paolo lost some of his shape just standing opposite him. No threats, no raised voice. Dante picked up his lighter, slid it into his pocket, and said, "The girl is leaving with me." Paolo barked a laugh. "You can't be serious." Dante looked at him. That was all. The owner of the restaurant, Paolo's father, sweating through his collar now, rose halfway out of his seat. "Dante, there's no need to make this." "There was no need," Dante said, "to make a spectacle of a woman in my presence." The last 2 words landed like a door bolt sliding home. In my presence. Not mine, not yet. Something colder, territorial in a way that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with law. Paolo found enough courage to sneer. "Since when do you care about kitchen girls?" Dante's face did not change. "Since one of you forgot how to behave." He turned toward me. "Get your coat." I should have refused. I knew that, even as my body leaned toward the possibility of escape so quickly it almost embarrassed me. Going with him was madness. Staying was familiar. Familiar had almost killed me before. Madness merely introduced itself more honestly. My things are in the kitchen." "Then get them, little flame." The nickname should have offended me. It did a little. It sounded observational, not tender, as if he had named a trait and taken inventory of it. But it also made my heart kick once hard. I had no time to understand why. Behind me, a glass shattered. Nobody screamed. In rooms like that, fear had etiquette. I turned just as one of Paolo's men lunged, not at me, at Dante. A steak knife flashed in the chandelier light. Dante moved before my mind could catch up. He caught the man's wrist, turned, and drove him face first into the table edge with one brutal, efficient motion. Plates jumped. Wine spread like blood. The room stayed silent. That was the worst part. Not the violence. The competence. The way every armed man at the walls remained still because they knew exactly whose permission mattered. Dante did not look back at the man he had dropped. He looked only at me. "Coat," he said. And I knew with perfect clarity that if I walked out with him, whatever life I had before this room would not be waiting when I came back. I went anyway. I did not speak in the car because I was afraid my voice would choose the wrong truth. Palermo after midnight looked less like a city than a secret. Street lamps burned gold over narrow stone roads slick with sea damp. Laundry lines shifted overhead between old buildings. The tires hummed over uneven pavement, and the partition between the front and back seats stayed lowered, which somehow felt more intimate than if it had been raised. Dante sat beside me, not touching, one hand loose on his thigh. Oscar Bellini drove. I knew his name because Dante had used it once outside the restaurant with the kind of economy that made every syllable sound assigned. "Home," Dante had said. Oscar had looked at my face in the rearview mirror, then at my wrists, and muttered, "Madonna protect us, another one." Dante had not answered. Oscar, apparently, took silence as permission to continue living. Now he adjusted the wheel and sighed the sigh of a man personally wronged by the entire world. "For the record," he announced to the windshield, "I had grilled fish waiting for me, dry fish, the fish of a disciplined man." Maria finally agreed to stop drowning my vegetables in olive oil, and now I'm driving through the city at midnight with violence in the upholstery. "Oscar," Dante said. "Yes, boss, drive. I am driving. Very well, I might add. Nobody appreciates steering until it fails." I looked down before I smiled. It escaped anyway, small and accidental. The rearview mirror caught it. Oscar looked absurdly pleased with himself. Beside me, Dante noticed. That was the unsettling thing about him. Nothing seemed to pass under his gaze without being quietly filed away. We crossed through wrought iron gates into an estate above the water, all pale stone and dark windows and cypress shadows. The house was not flashy in the way new money tried to be. It was older than that. Confident, a place built by men who expected walls to outlive everyone inside them. When the car stopped, Dante got out first. By the time my door opened, the night air had wrapped cold fingers around my bare arms. Somewhere below the bluff, waves struck rock in slow, patient bursts. I stepped onto a gravel drive and looked up at a house with too many lit windows for any of them to feel safe. "Am I a guest?" I asked quietly, "or a prisoner?" Oscar made a choking sound in the front seat, like he had swallowed a prayer bead. Dante shut the car door and faced me. "Do you plan to run tonight?" "No. Then be a guest until you force me to answer differently." He started toward the entrance. I hated that the answer steadied me. Inside, the floor was marble cold enough to travel through the thin soles of my shoes. The foyer opened into a hall lined with oil paintings of dead men who looked disappointed in the future. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock struck one. I could smell beeswax, coffee gone stale in a kitchen, and that same trace of bergamot when Dante passed close enough for my sleeve to stir. A woman in a dark dress appeared from a side corridor, with the speed of someone who had spent years answering alarms calmly. She was in her 50s, compact and stern, with silver threaded through black hair pulled into a knot. Her eyes took in everything: me, my clothes, my wrists, the set of Dante's mouth. "Maria," Oscar said from behind us, hand over his heart. "I survived." She looked at him as though survival had been a clerical oversight. "That remains to be seen," Oscar sighed tragically. "One day you'll mourn me. One day I'll get a quiet breakfast." Dante did not smile, but something at the corner of his mouth came close enough to make my pulse stumble again. "Tea," he said to Maria, "and the blue room." Maria nodded once. To me she said, "Come." I looked at Dante. That annoyed me immediately, the instinct to look at him before moving. "You're safe for the night," he said. Safe. The word should not have meant anything coming from a man whose stillness frightened armed men. It did. Maria led me upstairs through halls softened by runners and low lamps. The blue room was larger than my childhood apartment. Pale walls, heavy curtains, a bed big enough to make me suspicious. On a table by the window sat a porcelain bowl filled with lemons. Their scent cut through the room's coolness like clean light. Maria closed the door behind us and set a tray down. Tea, water. A small plate of almond biscuits. "You can bathe," she said. "There are clothes in the wardrobe, I guessed your size." I stared at her. "Why are you being kind to me?" She lifted one shoulder. Because no one was kind enough soon enough to me. That answer settled deep. She moved closer, not touching, and lowered her voice. He brought you here, which means no one in this house harms you without dying tired. But do not mistake that for simplicity. This world has rules. Learn them quickly. Who is he really? Maria held my gaze. Exactly what people whisper. When she left, I stood in the middle of the room for a full minute with my hands hanging at my sides, as if the evening had left them there. In the bathroom, steam rose around me and the mirror fogged while I undressed. Under bright light, the bruises looked worse. Rope marks, yes, fingerprints too, a small cut near my left thumb. Purple blooming yellow, evidence of a life I had spent too long translating into less ugly language. I bathed fast, changed into a cream nightdress borrowed from someone wealthier and taller than me. When I came back into the room, Dante was there. I stopped so hard my damp hair brushed my mouth. He stood at the window with his back to me, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled once. The lighter clicked open in his hand, closed, he had not lit it. You shouldn't be in here, I said. No, he said, but I am. My heart moved oddly, not faster, heavier. You could have knocked. I could have. I crossed my arms over myself, then hated that it looked defensive and dropped them again. Do men always answer questions like that around you, or do they receive lessons first? He turned. The room was dim except for the lamp by the bed. It put shadows under his cheekbones and made his eyes look almost black. Sit, he said. I'd rather stand. Then stand. The answer disarmed me more than command would have. He looked at my wrists. Who did it? I swallowed. If I tell you what happens, if it was deserved, I'll know. The words hit like cold water. My chin rose on instinct. There's nothing a person does to deserve being tied up. Something shifted in his face. Not apology. Recognition, maybe, of a line tested and found intact. Good, he said. Then tell me, it was my father. He did not react the way other people did to ugly truths. No gasp, no theatrical disgust. Just a dangerous reduction of movement, as if part of him had gone very still for the sake of accuracy. Why? He handles suppliers for La Rocca, or he used to. Money's missing. My throat tightened, but I pushed through. He wanted me to change invoices. He said if I loved him, I'd help. When I asked where the money was going, I looked down at my wrists. He said I had forgotten who kept me fed. Dante crossed the room. I stayed where I was, though every nerve noticed. He stopped near enough that I could see the faint line of an old scar disappearing beneath his collar. Did he touch you anywhere else? The careful flatness of the question made answering possible. No, has anyone? No. Something brutal and unreadable moved behind his eyes, gone before I could name it. You'll stay here until I decide what to do. My laugh came out frayed. That isn't much better than my father deciding. It is, he said, if I intend to keep you alive. There it was again, not softness, the harder thing, a promise made like policy. I stepped back before I could stop myself. You don't know me. He looked at my wrists, then back at my face. I know enough. For what? To know you didn't hide. My breath caught. He turned for the door, then paused with his hand on the brass handle. Lock it if you want. It only locks from the inside. The distinction mattered. He knew it would. When he left, the room felt larger and less breathable at once. I crossed to the door and turned the lock with trembling fingers. Then I leaned my forehead against the wood and tried not to understand why the quiet control in his voice had terrified me less than kindness would have. From the corridor came Oscar's muffled complaint drifting upward through the hall. Maria, if there is butter in those eggs again, I'll know this house wants me dead. Her answer was immediate. Eat and die quietly, then. Despite everything, a startled sound left me, almost a laugh, the first one in weeks. In this house, I realized, even relief came armed. Morning in Dante Salvator's house arrived without mercy. Not sunlight, though there was plenty of that. Pouring hard and white through the tall windows, but the awareness of being somewhere every object had been chosen by a man who expected obedience from the world. Even the silence felt arranged. When I woke, it was to the faint grind of gravel below my window and the smell of coffee drifting under my door. For 3 full seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I sat up too fast, saw the unfamiliar blue walls, and felt the night return in one hard piece. I dressed in dark trousers and a white blouse Maria had left folded on a chair. The clothes fit too well. When I opened the wardrobe, I found more sweaters, dresses, shoes in my size, practical, not glamorous. That frightened me more than silk would have. Silk would have been vanity. This was planning. Downstairs, the kitchen was warmer than the rest of the house, all copper pans and sunlight on tile. Maria stood at the stove, immaculate as judgment. Oscar sat at the long wooden table with a plate of eggs and a face like a martyr in a devotional painting. "There she is," he said as I entered. "The reason I had to miss my fish." Maria set down a basket of bread. "If you mention that fish again, I'll bury you with it." Oscar pressed a hand to his chest. "Hear how she flirts with me." I should not have smiled. I did. Maria noticed and pretended not to. "Sit, Alina," she said. "Eat before the men ruin the day." I sat. My wrists ached when I reached for a cup. Maria saw that too. She saw everything and treated the seeing like work, not spectacle. Another mercy. Oscar leaned toward me, lowering his voice theatrically. "If the boss tells you I am indispensable, know that this is true. If Maria tells you I am dramatic, know that she is jealous of my bone structure." Maria slid a bowl of fruit in front of him without looking. "Eat a peach and be quiet. She wants me healthy for the funeral." A sound came from the doorway, not a laugh, closer to one than I had yet heard from Dante. I turned too fast. He stood there in a charcoal suit, no jacket yet, phone in one hand, lighter in the other. The metallic click cut once through the room before he closed it again. Open, shut, a private rhythm. His gaze moved from Oscar's theatrics to me, then rested a fraction too long on the sleeves covering my wrists. The kitchen altered around him, not frozen, tuned. "Oscar," he said. Oscar straightened. "Yes, boss, I'm already suffering productively. After breakfast, bring Matteo to the study." Oscar nodded and began eating like a man newly employed. Dante looked at me. "You bake." It was not a question, but I answered it anyway. "Pastry. You trained at the conservatory in Palermo." Maria set a small bowl beside me, honey ricotta with orange zest. "She trained," she said, which sounded suspiciously like pride after less than 12 hours. Dante's gaze flicked to Maria, then back to me. "Make something," I blinked. Now, yes, there were 100 reasonable objections. I was a stranger in his house. I did not know his kitchen. My life had cracked open the night before. None of them mattered once he said, "I want to see your hands when they're doing what they were made for instead of surviving what they were not." The room went very still. Oscar looked at his plate with intense diplomacy. Maria, saint that she was, moved to the pantry without comment. I stood slowly. Baking had always been the only place my thoughts arranged themselves properly. Flour, heat, ratio, timing. Butter could be coaxed. Sugar had rules. Egg whites could be ruined by one careless drop of yolk. But if you were patient enough, precise enough, they became structure from air. I washed my hands at the deep stone sink while Dante remained in the doorway, watching without appearing to. The water ran cool over my wrists. The bruises glared back when I pushed up my sleeves. He saw them, he saw me see him see them. Neither of us spoke. I found pistachios, blood oranges, dark chocolate, cream. Maria supplied what I missed without hovering. Soon the room filled with scents that belonged to me more than fear did. Toasted nuts, citrus oil released under my thumb, sugar warming toward amber. Oscar wandered over. "If this contains butter, I consider it an attack." "It contains sugar," I said. He sighed. "At last, an honest killer." I laughed under my breath and kept whisking. My hands shook only once, when I reached too quickly for a knife and the steel flashed. Dante noticed before anyone else. He moved one step into the kitchen, then stopped himself. The restraint of it snagged somewhere under my ribs. He wanted to intervene. He didn't. Not because he felt nothing, because he had decided something about my dignity and was honoring it. That was somehow worse for me. I built the dessert in quiet layers. Bitter chocolate base, orange cream center, pistachio praline shells spun thin and fragile over the top. When it was done, it looked elegant enough to belong in a room that had never deserved it. "What is it called?" Dante asked. I stared at the dessert longer than necessary. "Glass heart," Oscar whistled softly. "Subtle. It looks strong," I said before I thought better of it. "The shell is the loudest part. But it breaks if you breathe wrong." Maria went very still at the stove. Dante did not move. Then he stepped closer, picked up a spoon, and cracked the shell with one exact touch. The sound was light. Delicate, final, he tasted it. Everything in me tightened, not because I needed praise, because I did not need indifference from him and knew too late that those were different fears. His gaze lifted. "It's better than anything served at La Rocca," he said. Oscar groaned. "Wonderful, we're adopting talent." "Do you know what this means for my discipline?" "It means," Maria said, "you'll die fed." A knock sounded at the kitchen door. A man entered without waiting for permission, then stopped when he saw me. He was broad-shouldered, with close-cropped dark hair and a face made harder by an old break in the nose. Not handsome. Capable. He wore a holster under his jacket and carried the dangerous stillness of someone who trusted weapons because he trusted little else. "Boss," he said to Dante, then looked at me with the fast assessment of a soldier mapping risk. "Didn't know we had company." "Elena stays," Dante said, just that. The man's brows lifted a fraction. "Then we have a problem." "What kind?" I asked before caution could choke me. He looked at Dante, waiting. "Speak," Dante said. "Your father's apartment was emptied before dawn," the man said to me. "Papers gone, computer smashed. Neighbor says 2 men carried boxes out around 3. Cold spread under my skin. My father? Missing. The kitchen lost some of its edges. Dante set the spoon down with surgical care. "Matteo, check the supplier routes. Every ledger, every shell company tied to La Rocca or Castiello imports. Start with the invoices Elena handled." My head snapped up. "Castiello?" Matteo looked at Dante again. I understood too late I had said a name I should not know. "My father mentioned them once," I lied. "On the phone." Dante's eyes narrowed. He did not call me out, he simply stored it. Matteo left. Oscar left more slowly, after seeing Dante's face, and deciding survival required absence. Maria remained at the stove with the tact of a woman who knew when pretending not to hear was a form of loyalty. "You know more than you said last night," Dante said. I stared at the broken sugar shell on the plate. "Yes, tell me." My father had me rewrite invoices for private dinners, not food totals, delivery windows, names shortened to initials. He said it was tax nonsense. I swallowed. 3 weeks ago I saw a list, girls' names, ages, arrival times. The room changed temperature. Maria set down the spoon she was holding. Dante went so still I almost missed the way his hand closed once, hard, around the lighter in his pocket. "You should have led with that," he said. "I was trying to understand if telling you would make me safer or just useful." His jaw shifted. Truth, apparently, interested him more than obedience. "Both," he said. "It should have chilled me." Instead, it felt like the first honest sentence of the day. By noon, my old life was no longer missing. It was gone. And whatever Dante Salvator planned to do with the information I had not yet fully given him, I knew one thing with ugly certainty. Someone had already started moving against us. By evening, I understood 2 things about Dante Salvator's world. The first was that information moved faster than blood in it. The second was that tenderness, when it appeared, did so in places rough enough to leave marks. Rain came in off the sea after sunset, slanting silver against the estate windows. The house dimmed into amber pools of lamplight and long corridors of shadow. Men arrived in 2s and 3s, quiet shoes, lower voices, hands near jackets. No one told me to stay upstairs. No one had to. The air itself did it. I disobeyed anyway, not completely. I only went as far as the small chapel attached to the east wing, because Maria had mentioned it while showing me where the linen closet was. And something about a private chapel, inside a criminal's home, struck me as either obscene or honest. The chapel was small and older than the rest of the house, built from pale stone rubbed smooth by decades of hands and prayer. A single red candle glowed beside the altar. Rain tapped the stained glass windows. The saints above them had the resigned faces of people who had watched men bargain with God and call it repentance. I sat in the last pew and folded my arms around myself. I did not come from a devout family. My father only believed in God when he wanted a witness. But kitchens and churches shared one thing. Both asked for faith and transformations you could not force. Dough rose. Sugar changed color. People knelt and hoped not to leave unchanged. The chapel door opened behind me. I did not turn. I knew it was Dante before I heard the lighter. Click. Closed, no flame. You disappear quietly, he said. I thought that was useful here. His steps echoed once, then softened on the old runner. He stopped beside the pew instead of in front of me. It felt deliberate, less like being cornered. More like being kept company by something dangerous that had decided not to bite. The house is on alert, he said. You shouldn't be alone. I looked at the altar. You have a chapel in a place full of armed men. I assumed irony could protect me. A breath left him, not laughter, near enough to count. Thunder rolled over the bluff. The lights flickered once. Then darkness fell hard and complete. For one blind second, the world vanished. I stood too quickly, knocked my knee against the pew, and slipped on the stone floor. Dante caught me. One arm around my waist. One hand braced at my elbow. Heat through thin cloth. Strength checked at exactly the right point, not dragging me upright so much as arresting the fall before it became mine. The dark seemed to press closer around that touch. My palm landed against his chest, hard muscle under crisp cotton. His heart beat slow, slower than mine deserved. Neither of us moved. Then the generator kicked in. Dim emergency lights breathed blue along the chapel walls. His face came back in pieces first, the scar at his temple, the hard line of his mouth, the strange restraint in his eyes. I stepped back too fast. Sorry, I said. For what? For almost falling. You didn't. His gaze dropped once to the hand still at my elbow. He let go immediately. That should have relieved me. It did not. We stood in the low blue light while rain worried the stained glass. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the lighter, and turned it once through his fingers. Click. The sound was softer in the chapel. Intimate, almost. What happened here? I asked before caution could stop me. He did not pretend not to understand. My mother prayed in this room after my father was shot. That's not what I meant. His eyes rested on the altar, not me. For a long moment I thought he would leave. Instead he said, "My sister used to sit where you're sitting." The words were plain. The silence around them was not. I waited. She came to me once with bruises on her wrists. His voice stayed, even in a way that made the story hurt more. I told her I'd handle it after a meeting. By the time I got there, she was dead. Something cold slid through me. He was not looking at me now, maybe because he would not. Maybe because if he did, the memory would take on a face that still breathed. That man, he said, kept telling her to cover them, to stop making him feel judged. My throat tightened. I'm sorry. He turned the lighter shut with a sharp metallic note. Just don't lie to me again. There it was, the price of shelter. I didn't know if I could trust you. You still don't. No, good. The answer startled me enough that I looked at him. He met my gaze without softness. Trust built too fast in my world gets people buried. A knock landed at the chapel door. Oscar stuck his head in, took one look at the two of us in the half-dark, and raised both hands. If this is a murder, I was never here. Dante stared at him. Oscar cleared his throat. Generators steady. Mateo wants the east gate reinforced. Also, a pigeon got into the courtyard, and I'd like it noted that I remained brave. Pigeons make you brave? I asked. Oscar looked offended. Pigeons are devils with wings. They know what they are. For the first time all day, laughter pulled at me before I could protect myself from it. Real this time. Small, but real. Dante heard it. So did Oscar, who straightened as if knighted. There, I serve the household. Maria appeared behind him like an answered threat. You serve noise. Oscar touched his chest. Cruel. In front of the saints. When they disappeared again, the chapel went quiet in a different way. Less haunted, more dangerous for that. Dante looked at me for one unreadable second too long. Then he said, "Tomorrow you'll help Matteo go through the supplier ledgers. I thought you didn't want me involved. I don't want you dead." He slipped the lighter back into his pocket. "That leaves us limited choices." I should have said something cutting, something about how control sounded prettier dressed as concern. Instead I asked, "Why little flame?" His expression barely changed. "Because everyone in that room wanted you ashamed, and you burned instead." The words landed low and strange. Before I could answer, he stepped back. Distance, safety, or the version of it he permitted. "At breakfast," he said, "stay where my men can see you." "Is that an order?" "Yes. And if I don't like orders?" His eyes moved over my face once, slow enough to feel. "You're still here." Then he left me in the blue-lit chapel with thunder at the windows, the echo of his hand at my waist. And the uncomfortable knowledge that the first man to make me feel safe had done it, while sounding exactly like a threat. I stayed there until the red candle guttered low. When I finally stood, I noticed something scratched into the last pew where my fingers had been resting. A name, old, nearly worn away. Lucia. His sister, I thought, and understood with a sick clarity that in this house, even the dead were still part of the conversation. The ledgers arrived just after noon, stacked in Dante's study like bricks someone hoped could hold back floodwater. The room smelled of leather, paper, and the bitter shot of espresso cooling on Dante's desk. Tall windows faced the sea. Shelves climbed the walls in dark wood. A map of shipping routes had been pinned behind the desk with colored markers so exact they looked surgical. Nothing in the room suggested chaos. That made the chaos inside the files feel worse. Matteo Ferrero stood at the side table sorting invoices by date. He had softened toward me by a degree since the kitchen. In men like him, that counted as welcome. "These are the restaurant books, supplier transfers, private event payments," he said. "And these," he tapped a thinner pile, "are the ones that don't balance unless someone is laundering with a poet's imagination." I sat across from Dante's desk and opened the first ledger. My hands were steadier with paper than they had been with people. Numbers did not leer. Dates did not lie unless taught. For an hour I found nothing except proof that rich men enjoyed hiding filth under expensive ink. Then I saw a sequence I recognized, not the numbers themselves. The spacing, a private dinner. 12 guests, citrus order increased by half, chocolate reduced, pistachio added, delivery time moved from 8 to 11. I turned 3 pages back and found another, same spacing. Different initials, the same pattern in garnish requests I had once thought bizarrely specific. "It isn't the totals," I said. Dante looked up from the report in his hand. "It's the menu alterations." I reached for another file, then another. "My father changed dessert components on nights he was nervous. I thought he was hiding cost shifts. But he always made me write them a certain way." Matteo came closer. "Meaning what?" I stood and crossed to the wall map before I fully knew what I was doing. "Meaning he needed a code he could remember without carrying one." Dante said nothing. That was becoming a pressure of its own. I took a pencil and circled 3 dates. Blood orange meant port access. Pistachio meant refrigerated transport. Dark chocolate meant cash collected up front. If the sugar cages were listed as hand-spun, that meant girls moved alone. If they were molded, it meant pairs. Matteo stared at me. "How do you know that?" "Because I made the menus." Shame and anger rose hot together. He'd stand beside me and say, "No, not raspberries tonight, make it orange." "No, increase the shell thickness, they're special clients." I thought he was being controlling because he enjoyed it. My mouth dried out. Maybe he was, but he was also making a ledger out of my work. No one spoke for a moment. Something in my chest caved quietly under the realization. My one clean thing, my one language, used that way. Matteo swore under his breath, not at me. For me, maybe. Dante rose from behind the desk. The room seemed to redraw itself around the movement. "Show me every pattern," he said, so I did. I showed them how plated desserts mapped onto roots, how custom caramel colors flagged urgency, how initials matched private dining rooms along the harbor, and one abandoned cold storage facility outside the city. By the time I finished, the wall map looked like someone had finally admitted where the rot lived. Matteo exhaled hard. Madonna! Dante's eyes were on the circles, then on me. You remembered all this. I remember recipes, I said, and mistakes. It was the closest I could come to saying I remembered because my life had trained me to. Because noticing patterns kept pain from arriving as a surprise, Matteo gathered the marked pages. I'll get men to the storage site. Dante shook his head once. Not yet, Matteo frowned. If there are girls in transit, if there were, the pattern would show same-day refrigeration spikes. It doesn't. Dante looked at me. When's the next window? I checked the dates, the recurring intervals, the altered citrus counts. Tomorrow night, maybe early morning after. Then someone warned them, Matteo said. The room went cold. Only 5 people had known I was helping with the books. Dante, Matteo, Maria, Oscar, and Aldo Greco. The gray-haired steward who ran the estate logistics with old-world politeness, and keys to nearly every locked door in the house. I told no one, I said. Matteo's face tightened. Neither did I. Dante rested one hand on the desk, scarred knuckles, quiet force. We proceed as if the house breathes through ears we haven't found yet. Matteo nodded and left with the files. When the door shut, silence expanded. I remained standing by the map because sitting felt too defenseless. Dante crossed to the bar cart, poured water into a crystal glass, and held it out. His fingers did not touch mine when I took it, though they came near enough for heat to matter. You're shaking, he said. I drank to avoid answering. It did not help. They used my work, I said finally. Every menu, every decoration. I thought I was making beautiful things. I was helping men move girls like inventory. His gaze did not leave my face. You didn't know. I should have. No, the word landed hard enough to stop my spiral. Guilt belongs to the hand that wielded the knife, not the steel. I set the glass down too quickly. That sounds like something a man tells himself so he can sleep. His jaw shifted once. I knew instantly I had struck something living. I don't sleep much, he said. The study held its breath. I should have apologized. Instead, I asked, because some part of me had started to want the truth from him even when it cut. Because of your sister. He looked out toward the sea. Because men kept telling me I couldn't have known, because they were wrong. The answer went through me slowly. It was not a speech, not a confession arranged for sympathy. Just a fact offered like exposed wire. I leaned back against the map table before my knees betrayed me. I called my father once after he tied me up. I told him I'd help if he stopped looking at me like I was a debt he regretted. My throat tightened. He cried. He said he was sorry. Then the next day he asked for my bank card. Dante looked at me then with something so stripped of pretense, it almost frightened me more than anger had. Some fathers aren't built for the word. My eyes burned. I hated that he saw, hated more that he did not make me pay for it with pity. A knock came. Oscar entered carrying a tray with espresso, and what looked suspiciously like 3 biscuits he had hidden under a napkin. He looked from my face to Dante's, read the temperature wrong on purpose, and sighed theatrically. Excellent, everyone is miserable, I brought carbohydrates. Oscar, Dante said. Yes, boss, but before you dismiss me, please note that Maria is trying to starve me into holiness. She's trying to keep you from dying in your sleep, I said. Oscar pointed at me as if I had betrayed a union. You see, this is how tyranny spreads. First the eggs, then the women join. To my horror, a laugh escaped me while my eyes still stung. Dante noticed both. Oscar set down the tray, lowered his voice, and said to me with surprising gentleness, Eat something, signorina. Terrible truths land better on full stomachs. After he left, Dante was quiet for a while. Then he said, Tonight you move to the room beside mine. I straightened. No, it wasn't framed as a discussion. I heard that, I'm still saying no. He came around the desk slowly, stopping a careful distance away. The leak is in the house, so put more guards on my door. I don't trust doors. Something in his tone made my pulse lift, not fear exactly, recognition. Do you trust me? I asked. He held my gaze, enough to move you closer. That was not an answer. It was worse, and somehow in his world truer. When I turned back to the map, I noticed one date circled in my own hand 3 years ago. Same code, same port, same initials beneath the order. LC Lucia Castiello, not Salvatore, Castiello. A slow, dreadful understanding began to form. And by the time I faced Dante again, I knew the girl whose death had made him ruthless was tied to the same men now hunting me. Dante's room was next to mine. That should have made me feel caged. Instead, it made sleep almost possible, which was its own kind of problem. The next day moved in tight circles, Matteo in and out with updates, Giulia Morty arriving to check the healing on my wrists. Aldo Greco gliding through hallways with polished shoes, and a courteous face that revealed nothing. Giulia was younger than I expected, in her early 30s, with dark curls twisted up, and the blunt hands of a woman who knew how to stop blood quickly. While she wrapped a cooling salve around my wrists, she said, "You should know something before you get too used to breathing here." I watched her fingers. "What? Dante keeps people alive very well," she tied off the bandage. "He doesn't always know how to live with them afterward." It felt less like warning than mercy. "And you?" I asked. "I stitch what his world tears." Her mouth curved without humor. "Try not to become my busiest project." By late afternoon, Matteo had traced the next coded shipment to a farmhouse road outside Montreal. Dante decided to go himself. "You're not taking me," I said in the entrance hall. "I am," he said. "That's not an explanation. It's a fact." Oscar, already holding keys, muttered, "Facts." The most exhausting genre. We drove at dusk through hills striped with olive trees. I sat in the back beside Dante again. Matteo followed in a second car with 2 men. The sky lowered purple over the road. Crickets sang in the ditches. Dante said almost nothing, but the air around him had sharpened into decision. I watched his hands instead of his face. Bad choice. His right rested near his thigh loose, while his left turned the silver lighter once, twice, then stilled. Click, closed. "Do you always do that?" I asked. His eyes flicked to mine. "What, with the lighter? It keeps my hands busy. From smoking, from worse habits." The answer sat between us, live and dangerous. Oscar looked into the rearview mirror. "For the record, I also have worse habits. Mine involve pastry after midnight." "Drive," Dante said. "See." No appreciation. The farmhouse appeared at the end of a dirt lane, lights dead, shutters hanging crooked. Matteo's car pulled ahead to sweep the outbuildings. Dante got out first. The air smelled of dust, wild rosemary, and the coming storm. He signaled me to stay in the car. I lasted 11 seconds. When I stepped out, his head turned sharply. "Back inside. There's no one here. That's why I'm worried." Too late. The first gunshot cracked from the trees. Dante moved before I heard the second. One arm hit my waist and drove me down behind the stone wall lining the lane. Gravel cut my palms. Oscar shouted something devotional and obscene at once. Matteo's men returned fire from the road. "Stay down," Dante said. Bullets snapped through olive branches overhead. I made the mistake of lifting my head. Dante shoved it back down with a hand at my nape, firm, furious, careful not to hurt. Then he rose just enough to fire twice across the lane. Efficient, no wasted motion, no rage in the trigger which made it more terrifying. Another shot. A hiss. Dante jerked back. For one horrible second, I thought he'd been hit in the chest. Then I saw blood darkening the sleeve high on his arm. Something in me went white. He seemed almost annoyed by it. "Matteo," he barked. "2 down," came the answer. "1 in the grove." Dante pushed me flatter against the wall as footsteps pounded the far side. A man vaulted over the stones, gun raised. Dante shot him before he landed. The body hit the dirt with a sound I would hear later in my sleep. Silence followed, real this time. Broken only by my breathing and Oscar somewhere near the car saying, "I hate all outdoor activity." Dante looked down at me. There was blood at his cuff. A streak of it on my sleeve where his arm had crossed me. "Are you hit?" "No." His shoulders dropped 1 fraction. "Good." He tried to stand. I caught his wrist. "You're bleeding. It can wait." No, my voice shook. It held anyway. Not this. Something flashed in his face. Memory, resistance. Then he gave one short nod. Inside the farmhouse, dust lay thick over abandoned furniture. Mateo secured the rooms while Oscar found a first aid kit by announcing loudly that if tetanus killed him after all this, he would haunt everybody. I cleaned Dante's wound at a cracked kitchen table while rain started against the shutters. The bullet had grazed muscle, not deep, still enough to make my stomach turn. He sat with his shirt sleeve cut away, forearm braced on the table. His skin was warm, scarred. There was another scar higher up, white and puckered, as if a blade had once tried to teach his body a lesson and failed. "You should be in a hospital," I said. "And explain this to whom?" I dabbed antiseptic. He did not flinch. That should not have moved me. It did. Most men would be swearing by now. Most men are allowed theatrics. I looked up before I could stop myself. He was already watching me. The room tightened. Rain thudded harder overhead. Somewhere in the hall, Oscar argued with Mateo about whether bandages expired spiritually or medically. I wrapped clean gauze around Dante's arm. My fingers brushed the inside of his wrist. Heat jumped straight into my throat. I tried to pull away too quickly. He caught my hand, not trapping, holding. My pulse turned visible. His thumb rested just beneath the fading bruise on my wrist, where the skin was finally yellowing at the edges. He looked at it, then at me. "Alina," he said quietly. No one had ever made my name sound like a warning I wanted to ignore. I could have moved. He left me room for it. That was the worst part. Instead, I heard myself whisper, "If you stop now, I think I'll imagine it forever." Everything in his face changed and stayed contained anyway. It made my chest ache. He touched my cheek with his uninjured hand first, a question disguised as contact. When I did not turn away, he bent and kissed me, not hard, not hungry, though hunger was there. Slow. Careful enough to undo me. The kind of kiss that made every earlier almost feel like rehearsal for disaster. I felt the restraint in it more than the desire, and that somehow burned worse. His mouth lingered once, twice, then left mine before I could forget how to breathe. He pressed his forehead briefly to mine. "That's all," he said, and I heard the cost of it. I nodded even though my body had already leaned toward more. He let go of my hand first. Dante, he had wanted her from the moment she refused shame, not beauty. He'd known beauty in 100 dangerous forms. It was the way she had stood in that dining room with bruises on her wrists and her hands uncovered, as if pain could be seen but not negotiated with. No tears for an audience. No plea. Just truth, naked and furious. It had cut straight through every lie he'd taught himself since Lucia died. And now, with Alina's mouth still warm under his, he knew the rest of it. He would burn half his empire before he let the world close over her. By the time we returned to the estate, war was no longer a possibility. It had chosen a date. War did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived with quieter things. Phones that stopped ringing back. Men who checked windows before answering doors. Mateo sleeping in his office chair with a gun on his lap. Maria sending food to rooms where no one finished it. Dante becoming calmer with each new threat, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. And me making the biggest mistake of my life because I wanted one answer too badly. My father called on the third morning after the ambush. A blocked number. Dawn still gray at the windows. I took the call in my room with my bare feet on cold marble and my heart halfway up my throat. "Alina," he said, weeping before I spoke. "Please, they said they'd kill me if I didn't run." I should have hung up and gone straight to Dante. Instead, I listened. "I never meant for this," my father said. "I was in debt. They offered a way out, just invoices, just names. Then it got bigger." He coughed hard. "Meet me at the old ferry terminal at noon. Come alone if you ever loved me at all. Love is such a stupid weapon when given to the wrong hands." I told Mateo I had a headache. I told Maria I wanted air. I took a scarf and lied to my own reflection. Giulia caught me halfway down the service stairs. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Garden." "With shoes for a city street?" I froze. Her eyes moved once over my face and softened in the saddest possible way. Tell me you're not doing something foolish for a man who put rope on your wrists." I looked away. "That's what I thought," she exhaled, then reached into her pocket and held out a small earpiece. "If you won't stop, at least don't go alone." "I'm driving. You can't tell Dante. I'm not doing this for Dante." We reached the terminal 5 minutes before noon. The place had been half abandoned for years, all rusted railings and gulls shrieking over empty water. Giulia parked 2 streets away and kept one hand inside her jacket near the gun she hoped not to use. "I hate this already," she said. "I know." "Good. I'd worry if you didn't." My father stepped from behind a shuttered ticket booth looking older by 10 years and smaller by 20. His coat hung badly. His eyes were bloodshot. For one impossible second, I saw the man who used to bring me sugared almonds from market stalls when I was little. Then I remembered the radiator. "Elena!" He reached for me. I stepped back. Pain crossed his face, and part of me hated that it still worked. "I was trying to protect you." "No," I said. "You were trying to own the part of me that still called it love." He cried then. Real tears, maybe, or useful ones. Rafael Castiello controls the routes now. Dante thinks he's chasing shipments, but there's a ledger with names, judges, harbor police, priests, everyone paid. If Dante gets it, they'll kill us all. "Where is it?" My father looked toward the water. Giulia's voice snapped from behind me. "Elena, down!" Gunfire broke the air. The first bullet shattered glass behind the booth. The second took Giulia high in the shoulder and spun her sideways. I screamed her name and dropped beside her as more shots cracked from the warehouse roofs. My father ran. Of course he ran. I dragged Giulia behind a concrete barrier while she cursed with terrifying calm, blood pouring hot over my hands. Men shouted. A van screeched somewhere near the curb. I saw one of Dante's guards go down at the end of the street and understood in one crushing instant what I had done. I had led them here. I had opened a door with my own hands. By the time Matteo's team arrived, the shooters were gone, my father was gone, and Giulia was white-faced against the concrete with blood soaking her shirt. She gripped my wrist before they lifted her. "Look at me," she said through clenched teeth. "If he asks, tell the truth, all of it." I rode back in the ambulance van with my hands red to the elbow. Dante was waiting in the courtyard when we returned. Men moved around him. He did not move at all. That frightened me more than shouting could have. Giulia survived surgery. The bullet missed the artery by grace or accident. Matteo's youngest cousin Nico did not. He had been 21 and always blushed when Maria insulted him. I had known him for 4 days. It was enough. Dante said nothing to me until night. Then he came to the blue room, closed the door, and stood with his hands at his sides like he did not trust them near anything breakable. "You left under my roof," he said. "Yes. You lied to my men. Yes. You got Giulia shot." Every word was exact, none louder than the last. They landed anyway. "Yes." I wanted him to rage. I wanted punishment to be simple enough to survive. Instead, he gave me truth. "If Giulia dies, that sits with you." His voice lowered. "If Nico dies because you still confuse pity with love, that sits with you too." I cried then, not because he was cruel, because he was right. He looked at the tears as if he hated them on principle. "At dawn," he said, "a ferry leaves for Naples. There's a passport in your name, cash, and a placement at a pastry school arranged through a woman who owes Maria 3 favors and me none." I stared at him. "You're sending me away. I'm giving you an exit." The room went hollow. "You want me gone. I want you alive." It should have sounded noble. It did not. It sounded like a man cutting off his own hand with steady aim. "I don't get to decide." "You do." He set an envelope on the dresser. "That's the decision." He left before I could say anything that would have made staying easier. At dawn, I sat in the back seat while Oscar drove me to the terminal in silence unusual enough to feel respectful. The envelope rested on my lap. Passport. Ticket. Enough cash to start over. The life I was supposed to have if I still believed ordinary safety could hold me. At the gate, Oscar cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, Signorina, people leave here all the time. Very few are given a chance to do it breathing." I nodded. He looked straight ahead. Also, Maria made you focaccia for the trip, which is basically a marriage proposal in housekeeper language. I almost smiled. Then I got out of the car and walked toward the ferry. I made it all the way to the ramp. Then I looked down at my hands, at the fading marks on my wrists, at the blood under my nails that no amount of scrubbing had fully removed. At the ticket trembling between my fingers. Leaving would save me. Maybe. It would also make Nico dead for nothing, Giulia bleeding for nothing. Every girl on those routes, a problem handed to someone else while I started sugar over in a clean city and pretended my conscience would let me taste anything again. So I turned around. I walked back past the ticket booth, past the guards, past Oscar gaping in the lane and got into the car. "You missed the boat," he said weakly. "I know," he stared at me. "Should I tell the boss you've had a religious experience, or do we simply die honest?" I looked out at the morning water. "Tell him I came back on purpose. It was the most expensive choice I had ever made. Dante did not forgive me when I returned. He accepted the fact of my presence the way a man accepted rain during harvest, hostile, practical, and unable to change it without burning the field. That hurt more than anger would have. For 2 days, the house moved around me in altered lines. Matteo spoke to me with the cautious respect owed to a live grenade. Maria fed me without comment and once pressed my shoulder in passing. Giulia, pale but furious in bed, said only, "At least you had the manners to come back." I apologized. She snorted, then winced. "Good, keep doing it in ways that matter." I tried. The first useful thing I did was remember the ledger key my father had almost given away before bullets found us. Judges, harbor police, priests, not money routes alone, protection routes. Names that turned crime into infrastructure. The second useful thing I did was notice Aldo Greco had stopped meeting my eyes. He remained perfectly mannered, perfectly helpful. Tea appeared when needed. Cars arrived on time, doors unlocked smoothly. But when Maria mentioned Nico's funeral, Aldo crossed himself with the wrong hand. It was a tiny thing. Meaningless to anyone who had not been raised around kitchens and prayers and the thousands of habits grief made visible. It stayed with me. That night I could not sleep. The corridor outside my room lay hushed under low sconces. I passed Dante's door and hated myself for listening to its silence. Then I saw light at the far end of the hall, in the records room. I should have gotten Matteo. Instead, I followed the light. Aldo stood at the open cabinet with a file in his hand and a phone pressed to his ear. I caught only the end. "Before dawn," he said softly. "No, she stayed." He turned. For one absurd second, we both pretended nothing was wrong. Then the lie broke. I backed toward the hall. He moved faster than his age had ever suggested. One hand clamped over my mouth, the other locked around my waist. I bit hard enough to taste blood. "Quiet, signorina," he hissed in my ear. "You'll only make this ugly." Too late. He dragged me through the service stair, down to the garage, and into the back of a supply van before any shout could leave me whole. I fought like an idiot and a civilian, which is to say badly but with conviction. He tied my wrists in front this time, maybe out of practicality, maybe out of old-fashioned politeness. Rope bit scar over bruise. My stomach turned. Not again, I thought. The van smelled of diesel, burlap, and old oranges. I lay on the metal floor counting turns, distance, the rise and fall of the road. Panic wanted a body. I gave it numbers instead. When the van finally stopped, gulls cried overhead. Harbor. They dragged me up narrow stairs into a room above the docks, where salt had eaten the window frames and mold lived in the corners. Rafael Castiello waited beside the broken shutters like a man expecting applause. He was beautiful in the ruined, expensive way certain monsters were. Mid-30s, dark blonde hair. A smile too knowing to be kind. His suit fit like sin. He held a glass of whiskey and looked at me as if we were meeting at a gallery, not in my kidnapping. "Elena," he said. At last, Aldo closed the door behind me. I turned on him first. "You let Nico die." His face tightened. "Boys die in these wars. You let Giulia. I saved this family for 20 years, he snapped. Do not reduce me to one girl's outrage, Raphael sighed. Aldo, please. If you sound guilty, it insults all the sacrifices we're making. He sounded almost bored. That was worse. You knew Lucia, I said before I could stop myself. Raphael's eyes sharpened. So Dante told you something after all. He set down the whiskey and came closer. Lucia was not my sister, she was my wife. The room tilted. What? Briefly, secretly. Foolishly, his smile vanished. And when she came to me with questions about the roots, I asked Dante to control her. He delayed. I delayed. Aldo buried the rest. She died because the 3 men around her all believed there would be time tomorrow. My stomach dropped through me. You're lying. Partly, he said. That's how the best truth is served. I thought of Dante in the chapel, of the way he had said after a meeting. Raphael saw understanding move through me and nodded once. Good. You hear rhythm, don't you? That's your gift, patterns, timing. Men mistake women like you for decorative until you remember where they put the bodies. I'm not helping you. No, he glanced at the rope around my wrists. You're helping him. By being here. The door opened again, a guard brought in my father. I had not known I still possessed that kind of hatred. It rose cold, not hot, clarifying, he could not meet my eyes. Raphael looked between us with academic interest. This is the problem with love. It makes cowards think they deserve rescue. My father started to cry. Elena, I don't. One word. It took everything I had. Raphael crouched in front of me. Dante is coming. He always comes when the wound is fresh enough. I want to see whether grief made him better or merely crueler. His gaze dropped to my bound wrists. You know what unsettled him, don't you? That you didn't hide. Lucia didn't either. Men like Dante spend their lives pretending power means never having to witness what they failed to stop. His hand reached toward my face. I turned my head before he touched me. Not brave. Instinctive, still enough to matter. His smile returned. There she is. After he left, Aldo stayed at the door and refused to look at me. My father sat in the corner weeping into his hands. I stared at the frayed rope around my wrists until the fibers came into focus, then out again. The knot was wrong. A kitchen knot. Fast, practical, meant for sacks, not prisoners. I had untied 1,000 of them with my teeth when deliveries came in wet from the docks. So I bent my head, ignored the burn in my shoulders, and began working at the rope while the harbor bells rang midnight below us and somewhere. I prayed with no faith at all. Dante Salvator learned exactly who had betrayed him. By the time I got one wrist free, my mouth tasted like hemp and blood. My father had finally stopped crying. That frightened me more than the tears. He sat slumped against the wall as if every useful lie had leaked out of him. You should have left, he said hoarsely. I rubbed feeling back into my hand. You should have been a father. He shut his eyes. There are moments when pain stops being dramatic and becomes administrative. You inventory it. Split lip, rope burn, shoulder cramp. Terror waiting in the hall. I used that kind of pain to stand. The window overlooked the harbor. 3 levels down, corrugated roof, narrow alley, black water beyond. Impossible jump. Stupid option. I looked anyway, then I heard it, not voices. A sound pattern, 1 short horn from the water, 2 bells from the church uphill, a pause, another horn, schedule, the freight line. I had heard my father mutter it over order sheets for months. 2 bells, 1 horn meant loading from the eastern dock road after midnight. Raphael had brought me near his next move because he wanted Dante to see it. Vanity made men sloppy. I searched the room for anything useful and found a rusted tin of carpenter's pencils on a shelf by the shutters. I snapped one, scribbled E. Dock 2 bell/horn on the back of an old invoice, and pushed it through the gap under the door the first time footsteps passed and paused. Maybe a guard would ignore it. Maybe Matteo would find it if Dante was already close. Maybe hope was just another stupid weapon. Then shouting broke out below. Gunfire answered. My father lunged for me. Come on. For what? So you can sell the next version of me? His face crumpled. I never sold you. No, I said. You only kept pricing me. The lock blew apart before he could answer. The door slammed inward. Smoke bit the air. Matteo entered first, hard and bloody at the mouth, gun up. Behind him came Dante. He did not look relieved to see me alive. He looked murderous that I had not been. That should not have steadied me. It did. He crossed the room in 3 strides, cut the rest of the rope from my wrists, and took my face in both hands as if checking for cracks. He would bill the world for later. Are you hurt? I'm okay. His eyes said he did not believe in the word. My father stumbled forward. Dante, listen, I can explain. Dante's gun shifted toward him with terrifying ease. No, the word tore out of me before thought. Not here. Dante's jaw locked. For one awful second, I thought he would do it anyway. Then he lowered the gun a fraction. That mercy cost him something. I saw it. East Dock, I said quickly. 2 bells, 1 horn, he's moving tonight. Matteo swore and pressed a hand to his earpiece. Teams to the eastern road. Move. Outside, the harbor had become a throat of noise. Men shouting, boots on iron stairs, gulls exploding into dark air. Dante moved me behind him automatically as we descended. At the second landing, a body blocked the passage. Although he was alive, barely. Blood spread under him in a slow black shine. He looked up at Dante with the exhausted shame of an old man who had finally run out of justifications. He said Lucia would live, Aldo whispered. Raphael said if I buried the root records, he'd get her out. By the time I knew, he coughed red. I told myself I was protecting the family. All I protected was rot. Dante went still. This was the man who had likely taught him to tie a tie, choose a knife, survive his father's temper. It showed in the silence between them. In the way hatred had to move through grief before becoming clean enough to use. Aldo looked at me. I am sorry, Signorina. Then at Dante. Don't become what he thinks you are. He died before anyone answered. Dante closed the old man's eyes with 2 fingers and stood. We reached the lower dock in time to hear Oscar shouting from behind a truck. I am too elegant for this much gunfire. Maria had no business being there, and yet somehow was. Crouched behind crates with Giulia, pale, stitched, furious, because apparently every woman in Dante's orbit had been born with a broken instinct for self-preservation. Giulia saw me and looked ready to kill me herself. The relief underneath almost undid me. Later, she barked, reading my face perfectly. Raphael's men were loading 2 refrigerated vans at the far end of the quay. Blue-white security lights glared on wet concrete. The sea wind carried diesel, salt, and old fish. Dante touched the small of my back once. Stay with Oscar. Oscar looked personally insulted. Why am I suddenly the nursery? Because you know when to run, Matteo said. Oscar squared his shoulders. Untrue, I know when to retreat with tactical beauty. Dante moved off with Matteo and 6 men, all dark suits and deadly economy. I should have stayed where he put me. Instead, I grabbed Oscar's sleeve and pointed at the nearer van. The refrigeration unit. If they go to Route 2, they cut uphill by the Chapel Road. Oscar blinked. How do you know that? Because the menus changed when the roads did. Please trust me. He looked at me once, long enough to see I was not asking lightly. Then, to my everlasting surprise, he nodded. Come on, little pastry criminal. We cut behind stacked pallets toward the service lane, just as one van roared forward. Oscar, to his credit, flung a crate of glass bottles into its path with the grief of a man sacrificing good mineral water. Tires screamed. The van fishtailed into the barrier. Men burst from the far side firing. Then Dante was there. I would remember that sight longer than I wanted to. Rain-slick concrete, muzzle flash, his body between mine and everything else. Not reckless. Certain. He shot the driver, dragged one man down with the butt of his gun, and took a knife across the ribs for the privilege of ending another before the blade went deeper. I screamed his name. He turned at the sound. That fraction almost cost him. Raphael stepped from behind the second van, aimed straight at Dante's spine, and I threw myself into Oscar hard enough to send him crashing into Raphael's arm. The shot went wide, into steel. Sparks, Oscar yelped. I helped! With the astonished tone of a man surviving against his own expectations. Matteo's men closed in. Raphael escaped into the warehouse maze above the dock. Dante grabbed my shoulders once, hard, checking I was real. Then he was gone after him. When the shooting finally thinned, I found blood on my hands again. This time it was his. And by the way Matteo looked toward the warehouse stairs, all of us understood the same thing. The next time Dante Salvator came back to me, one of us might not survive who followed. It ended where cold things were stored. That felt appropriate. The cannery warehouse above the eastern dock had once held tuna packed in salt and oil. Now it held crates with false manifests, bribe ledgers, and girls whose names had been turned into freight codes by men in good suits. By the time we forced the inner gates, dawn was trying and failing to lighten the sea. Matteo led the left flank. Giulia, bandaged and livid, handled the ambulances with a pistol at her hip because apparently recovery bored her. Oscar stayed with me near the loading bay and crossed himself so often I worried he might sprain something. "If I die," he told me, "tell Maria I loved her and also that I never stole the peach jam." That was Nico, God rest him. Emotion punched through me so quickly I almost laughed and cried at once. "You're not dying." "Excellent." "Because I'm starving." We found the first room full of records, not people. The second held 3 girls and 1 boy no older than 16, all terrified, all alive. The third held a refrigerated wall with fresh root sheets clipped to a board. I knew the handwriting, my father's. Below it, a second hand had added adjustments in neat blue ink. Raphael. "He's still upstairs," Matteo said. "How do you know?" "Because he thinks in balconies." It turned out he was right. The final office overlooked the harbor through shattered glass. Raphael stood inside with 1 gun and 1 hand on my father's shoulder. My father looked gray with shock, as if even now he had not expected his bargains to end where they always had. Dante entered first. I followed against orders because by then every important thing between us had already begun with disobedience. Raphael smiled when he saw me. "You kept her hands visible." "I wondered if you would." Dante's voice could have cut rope. "Let him go." My father made a sound halfway between hope and terror. Raphael laughed softly. "No. If I let him go, who reminds us what ordinary men will do for debt? He's the whole moral of the story." He looked at Dante. "You remember Lucia better than I do, I think. In my version, she was tired. In yours, she's probably pure." Dante did not move. That was when I understood the true shape of their mirror. Giulia's did not see himself as evil. He saw himself as honest about the price of power. Dante had built an empire trying not to become that honesty out loud. "You loved her?" I asked before anyone could stop me. Raphael turned to me almost pleasantly. "In the only way men like me manage." "That isn't love," I said. "No," his smile thinned. "And what do you call what he feels for you? Protection, possession." "He put you in a house with locked doors and called it safety." I thought of the inside lock, the room beside his, the ferry ticket, the fact that he had let me go even when it carved him open. "I call it the first time I was given a choice," I said. Something flickered in Dante's eyes, gone at once. "Still mine to see," Raphael sighed. "There it is." The faith of the rescued. He pushed my father forward suddenly. The shot came at the same moment from somewhere behind the shelves. Sniper. I saw the flash in broken glass and shouted before I knew the words. "Left!" Dante moved. So did Matteo from the doorway, firing up toward the catwalk. My father dropped screaming. The bullet meant for Dante tore through Raphael's side instead. Chaos broke open. Raphael staggered, shot my father in the chest almost by reflex, then turned the gun toward me. Dante reached him first, not with a speech, not with rage, just impact. Gun knocked wide, shoulder into ribs. Both men crashed through the office door into the catwalk rail hard enough to shake Rust into the air. The fight was ugly because real fights are. Too close for elegance, too tired for style. Raphael used a knife. Dante took the cut across his palm to keep it away from his throat, then drove him into the steel support again and again until the older structure shrieked. I ran to my father. Blood spread under him in warm sheets. He looked up at me with the helplessness of a man surprised to discover consequences had children. "Elena," he whispered. I was scared. I knelt anyway. That was the cruelty of love's leftovers. I know. I did love you. Maybe he believed that. Maybe some broken part of him had. It changed nothing and still hurt. I know, I said again. He died with his hand reaching toward my wrist and not quite touching it. When I looked up, Raphael had Dante against the rail with the knife at his throat and both of them bleeding hard. This is what you are, Raphael said, panting. You just package it better. Dante answered with the truth stripped to bone. Maybe. Then he looked at me, not for permission, for witness. I saw the exact instant. He chose the piece of himself he would not get back. He slammed his wounded hand into Raphael's face, took the knife through his side for the opening, and drove the other man backward over the broken rail. Raphael fell one level down into the machinery below with a sound like metal accepting an argument. Silence followed, then the slow drip of seawater through the roof. Matteo got the sniper. The ledgers were seized. The girls were moved out under blankets and Dawn. Nico's mother would still have to bury her son. Giulia would still carry a scar because I had loved foolishly in the wrong direction before I loved rightly in a dangerous one. Dante pressed one hand to his bleeding side and swayed once. I crossed to him fast enough to slip on oil. He caught me anyway, even then. It's over, I whispered, because I needed one thing in the room to become language. He looked at the body below, at my father, at the ledgers scattered open like exposed ribs, then back at me. Yes, he said, it is over. War leaves behind practical work, funerals, bandages. Statements arranged through lawyers who knew which truths to bury and which to parade. Quiet payments to families. Loud resignations in harbor offices once the bribery ledger reached the right hands. Dante's house did not become clean, houses like his never did, but some rooms were opened. Some locks changed. Some names removed from walls and payrolls and memory with deliberate hands. Giulia healed and made a sport of ordering everyone around with one functioning shoulder. Matteo began treating me like a person, instead of a variable, the day I argued with him about guard rotations and won. Oscar announced at breakfast one morning that surviving war had given him a devotional attachment to pastry, then proposed to Maria with a ring pull from a can of imported tomatoes and got hit with a dish towel for his trouble. She did not say yes. She also did not say no, which kept him luminous for days. 3 weeks after the cannery, I found Dante in the kitchen before sunrise. The whole house slept except the ovens and us. I had started baking again 2 days earlier because grief with nowhere to go turns poisonous. Maria had understood that before I did. She cleared me a station, set down flour, and said only, "Use your hands for the right thing." Now brioche dough rested under linen, and sugar syrup threaded off my spoon in clean amber lines. The kitchen windows were black mirrors over the sea. The marble under my bare feet held the night's cold. Dante stood by the doorway without jacket or tie, a fresh scar healing along his side under the open collar of his shirt. He had almost died and responded by becoming even quieter. I was still angry with him for the ferry ticket, still grateful for it too. Human hearts are badly organized rooms. You should be in bed, I said. You're awake. That isn't an argument. No, he agreed. I set down the spoon. What do you need, Dante? The question stayed between us, heavy, adult. He came in slowly and stopped at the far side of the table, not close enough to crowd, close enough to matter. I need to know whether you stayed because you felt indebted, he said, or because you chose me. Air left my lungs. There it was, no grand speech, no demand. Just the one wound that mattered, wearing a clean shirt and asking not to be lied to. I wiped my hands on a cloth because they had started trembling. At first I stayed because leaving felt like making Nico's death useful to cowards. He nodded once, accepted the ugly truth of it. Then, he asked. I looked at the dough, at the sugar, at the morning refusing to arrive yet. Then, I saw you let me go when keeping me would have been easier for you. I saw you not touch me when you wanted to. I saw you let me hate what you were without asking me to call it love. My throat tightened, and I realized I wasn't afraid of you anymore. I was afraid of what I had become capable of feeling in a place like this. His face changed by almost nothing. It was enough to ruin me. "You should say something," I whispered. "I'm trying to say the correct thing once." I laughed softly despite myself. "That sounds difficult for a man with so few words." "It is." He took one more step, then another, until he stood close enough for bergamot and clean soap and the faintest ghost of smoke to thread into the sugar-warm air. "Little flame," he said, "not cold now, not possession. Something warmer and more dangerous than either because it had been earned." My eyes burned instantly. "I bought a building in Palermo," he said. I blinked. "What?" "Old bakery near the market. Good ovens, terrible tile." One corner of his mouth moved. "It's yours if you want it." I stared at him. "If you don't," he added, "I'll sell it to someone with bad instincts." "That's not a proposal." "No." He reached into his pocket and took out the silver lighter. Set it on the flour-dusted table between us with ceremonial care. "This is." I looked from the lighter to his face. "I don't have practice asking for ordinary things," he said. "But I know this. I want every morning you'll let me stand in. I want the hard truths and the quiet ones. I want your skill used only for what you choose. And if marriage is the structure that protects those promises best, then I'm asking for it." My pulse went everywhere. "This is the least romantic proposal in Sicily. It's the best I can do before coffee." I laughed, then covered my mouth when it turned into crying halfway through. His expression tightened. "If that's a no, I'd prefer a cleaner weapon." "It isn't no." He went still. I stepped closer, not brave, shaking, honest. "It's only that if I say yes, I need you to understand I'm not agreeing to become small in your life. I'm not agreeing to disappear into your house and call it devotion." His hand came up slowly and brushed one knuckle down my cheek. "If you disappear," he said, "I burn the house down looking." That did it. I kissed him first only by the technicality of being the one who moved the last inch. Even then, it felt less like boldness than surrender to something already true. His mouth met mine with warmth instead of restraint this time, deepening only when I stayed. My hands found his shirt. His found my waist and stopped there, as if he still could not quite believe touching me without fear was permitted. When we broke apart, my forehead fell lightly against his chest. Somewhere in the doorway, Oscar made a strangled noise. "I would like everyone to know I can still retreat tactically." Maria hauled him backward by the sleeve. "Retreat faster." I laughed against Dante's shirt while he closed his eyes once, briefly, like a man allowing himself one whole second of peace. Later, after sunrise and coffee and too many people pretending not to notice the ring on my finger, I found the silver lighter in my apron pocket. He had left it there. A promise, I thought. Or a habit he was finally willing to share. 9 months later, the bakery opened before dawn because that was how I liked the city best. Before tourists, before gossip thickened in market lanes. Before every face became a history lesson. Salvator and Verla was what Oscar wanted on the sign because he claimed ampersands are sensual. Maria threatened him with a rolling pin until he accepted Verla Bakery in elegant gold letters over green paint and old repaired tile. Dante kept the terrible floor because I loved the sound it made under trays. The ovens ran hot by 5. By 6, the front room smelled of butter, espresso, orange peel, and fresh bread split open by steam. I wore flour on my cheek and my wedding band under dough because habit had not yet taught me how to keep precious things clean. We had been married 4 months, not in a fairy tale. In the estate chapel, with Giulia in a dark blue dress and one visible scar at her shoulder, Matteo standing like he distrusted joy, but would shoot anyone who interrupted it. Oscar crying so hard Maria had to hand him 2 handkerchiefs and half a threat. Dante wore black, of course. I wore ivory silk and did not tremble until he said little flame under his breath like a vow only I was meant to hear. Now ordinary life had become the strangest luxury of all. A child pressed his face to the glass while his mother fumbled for coins. An old priest argued theatrically about cannoli shells. Market workers came in for coffee and rolls. Sometimes men with Dante's surname or business stood outside pretending they were only there for breakfast. The world had not softened. We had simply built something warm inside it and called that resistance. At 8, Oscar burst through the door with a ledger under one arm and a paper cone of roasted chestnuts under the other. "I'm engaged," he announced. Maria, stacking apricot tarts behind the counter, did not look up. "No, you're impossible," Oscar beamed. "She hit me with a ladle and said if I embarrass her publicly, she'll poison me privately. That is basically church-sanctioned intimacy." I laughed. Giulia, seated at the corner table with coffee and hospital paperwork, said dryly, "Congratulations on surviving courtship." Oscar pointed at her. "You see." Witnesses. Dante entered behind him, and the room changed in the old way, except now it relaxed again a second later because this was my ground and people knew it. He wore a dark coat over an open-collar shirt, wind in his hair, danger in his posture the way some men wore cologne. But when his eyes found me behind the counter dusted in flour, something in him unarmed. No one else noticed the full extent of it. I always did. He came to the back work table and set a small box beside my mixing bowl. For the display window. Inside lay a tiny silver plaque shaped like a sugar shell. Glass heart, it read. I looked up too fast. "I thought you might want the first thing you made in my house to have a proper place in yours," he said. Emotion moved through me so cleanly I had to put both hands on the table. There were still nights he woke with Lucia's name locked behind his teeth and would not say it aloud. Still mornings when I caught him standing too still at the bakery door, as if checking I remained visible. Love had not erased what built him. It had only given the ruins an address. "Come here," I said softly. He crossed behind the counter. I held out my hands, that was all. No hiding the faint pale circles the rope had left, no folding them away, no shame offered up for comfort. Just my hands, open between us in the flower-warm morning, exactly as they had not been at La Rocca. Only now there was no audience to punish, no room to survive. Only him. His gaze dropped to my wrists first. It always would. Something old and dark moved through his face, followed by something gentler that still seemed to astonish him. He took my hands carefully, thumbs resting over scars time had not erased so much as translated. "You still do that," he said. "What? Show me the truth before the explanation." My throat tightened. "You noticed? I noticed the first night. I know." He lifted my hands and pressed his mouth once to the inside of my wrist, not the bruise, the memory of where it had been. The bakery sounds continued around us, cups clinking, Oscar over-explaining his engagement, Maria telling him love was not a medical emergency, Giulia laughing low into her coffee. Life. Loud, ordinary, impossible life. Dante reached into his coat and pulled out the silver lighter. For 1 second I saw Chapter 1 overlaid on the present. Chandeliers, public shame, that hard metallic click before everything changed. Now he flicked it open, only to light the small candle we had set beside the register each morning for Lucia, Nico, my father. And every name that did not make it into newspapers, but lived in us anyway. Click, flame, he set the lighter in my palm and folded my fingers around it. Same gesture, different world. "You keep it," he said. "It's yours." "So are you," he said quietly, and because he had only ever used the words twice, because this was the second and last. Because now they meant belonging chosen rather than ownership imposed, they landed with the full weight of everything survived. "If you still want that." I looked at him, at the man who had once been all edges and verdicts, at the husband who now stood in my bakery smelling faintly of cold air and bergamot, asking still. "Yes," I said, "I still want that." He smiled then, small, rare, ruinous, my little flame, warm now, entirely. I leaned into him for one brief second before the next customer walked in, because ordinary affection in daylight still felt radical enough to count as rebellion. And maybe that was the unresolved thing that would never leave us completely, not whether we loved each other, but whether love can ever make peace with what it had to survive in order to exist at all. Would you have chosen Dante, and let all that darkness become part of your life if it meant saving the people he could save, and becoming the one truth he never looked away from. He touched the wedding band hidden under flower on my finger, then the lighter in my hand, and I understood that some doors close not when danger ends, but when being seen no longer feels like a threat. It feels like home,